Session follows really nicely from the one just before, where we heard about some specific cases of people finding errors in the scientific record and trying to correct them. So this session is about scientific whistleblowers. We have 4 fantastic talks. We have a little bit longer, so we'll have some time for questions after each talk and some more general discussion at the end. So without further ado, our first speaker is Eugenie Reich.
Forward, okay. Hi. So my name is Eugenie Reich, and I'm a practicing attorney in the US. So I have a firm, Eugenie Reich Law LLC, and you know, because I'm an attorney, I'm going to say that nothing I'm saying is advice for anyone's particular circumstances. It's for discussion, I'll explain how my law practice is sustainable. It's a mixture of pro bono legal services. Almost all my clients are scientific whistleblowers, not everybody, but probably about 90%. And I also have a contingent fee model, which has been common for a long time in the United States, where for whistleblower cases, if you bring a complaint and successfully recover public funds, the whistleblower can qualify for a share and their lawyer can get paid. So upfront, I don't charge any whistleblowers, but if they have a meritorious case, for example, a grant fraud, we can hope to recover something. But a lot of the time, a claim will not be actionable, and if I think it's important and the person cannot get represented other ways, I'll often try to help. And as another disclosure, AIMOS, thank you, is covering my accommodation in Simine, helped to cover my travel from the US. So just background, how did I end up doing this? I had a first career as a science reporter. I published a book in 2009 about a fraud in condensed matter physics at Bell Labs, which is sadly no more in the sense that it was, but it was a great physics and applied physics research institution. And they had as they went into decline, they had a very serious fraud there, which I wrote a book about, which came out 7 years after the fraud, Plastic Fantastic. And I talked about, I described a lot of the factors that have come up today that contributed to that case of fraud, and that at the time I understood in that research field people were going to address and resolve within just a few years. I also then got involved in other cases, and this is an example of an article I wrote for Nature called Investigation Closed, whereas in the Bell Labs case there was a very transparent report about the fraud that was put online and circulated by the institution, enabling a reporter like me to come along afterwards and say, how did this happen? The majority of misconduct cases were being covered up or downplayed or sort of delayed into inaction. And I brought a lawsuit then still as a reporter under Freedom of Information, and that drew me into the law. I went to law school, and as my first big case, I became involved in one of these whistleblower cases in healthcare fraud. And tomorrow there's a workshop that I'm going to do about technical critiques, and I'm going to draw on some of what I learned from that lawsuit about how we show intent when there's a sort of irregularity of some kind in an organization or with data. And so after completing that case, I then created my own firm. So I created my firm in March. I already had a couple scientific fraud cases before that, but these are some of the issues that people are dealing with when they contact me. And I think in scientific fraud, technical subject matter is really one of the main ones, because if you're trying to resolve a fraud case, you often need assistance from non-experts like me or other lawyers or administrators at an institution or journal editors, and you're trying to explain something where as an expert you understand why this is what the evidence is and why someone has fudged something, and a non-expert, for example, someone who doesn't understand statistics, might have sat through the talk we had on statistics and struggling to understand why this is so fishy. And then all the other ones that I think apply to whistleblowers in probably all areas. And the major one that, the two that are important are this hiding data and keeping things confidential for the sake of it, are a major problem. You wouldn't think that sort of basic democratic principles apply in the scientific community from some of the things that people are told when they're trying to speak up about misconduct. And then I think the problem is that there's all these downsides to whistleblowing, and there's no real incentive. One of the things I like about this community when I learned about it is that it provides maybe a professional direction for people who've been involved in whistleblowing. If their field sees some downsides for them, maybe they can have research integrity and reproducibility as a positive focus when they come out, as they're coming out of it. These are some of the motivations that people have. And I want to pause on the fourth one, because I think the other three are things that might be more obvious. But protecting your own reputation and career, I think it's important to recognize that some whistleblowers turn to whistleblowing in part because they're going to be implicated if they don't speak up. So if you think about, sometimes when people contact me, not everybody, but some people have been in a situation where, you know, they figured out that something bad is going on, but they're not on record against it, and maybe they're on record supporting it. If you think about being a co-author on a paper where you learn less fraud, or being in a lab that you learn less committing fraud, we don't want to sort of, I think people have positive motivations when they address these things, but you also need to understand that these cases sometimes come out because people are put in a situation where I'm being dragged down if I don't lift myself up now. And you know, in the big case that I was a part of that I'll talk about more tomorrow, you know, the client was upfront about, at a certain point, realizing there was a problem in his organization and then choosing to report it to the government. But people can be afraid, like, am I going along with it now because I've learned about this and I've signed off on something? I don't want to sign off on this again now that I know, but it's a big paper on my CV. So what do I do? So you can become a whistleblower from this kind of self-saving incentive, and that's okay. You know, and then I put accountability and compensation together because I actually think that unless institutions, and maybe to an extent journals, understand that there can be a downside to going along with fraud, unless they recognize accountability in, you know, loss of audience, loss of customers, or loss of money in the case of an institution, they really have no upside, see no upside to redressing it. And then I think it's okay for some of that to go to compensation to people who call attention to the problems, who have an unbelievable toll on the amount of time available for their work when they're getting distracted by this stuff in their fields. So here are some of the self-correction channels. I don't know if I'll have time to go through all of them, but you recognize some of these. And I think the importance here is that of informal self-correction channels, because I see a lot of people, and we've had people speak about it, we want to see the literature corrected, we want to see the retraction of the bad paper, and we want to see printed admissions, or we want an institution to reach a misconduct finding. And if it's fraud, then people legitimately want those things, and they become, if you like, big prizes for someone who's calling a problem out. But a lot of what's effective goes on in informal interactions, and maybe as matter scientists you can find ways to measure and recognize these forms of self-correction, because I think they're extremely important. It's rare to get a retraction, but it might be much more common that people, and certainly thinking right back to my book, there was a whole chapter about people beginning to recognize that work could not be replicated long before there was an institutional recognition or correction or retraction in any journal. I think that complaints to funders or to government are effective, You know, I hope they're effective in court. We've had some scientific fraud cases get into court and or to result in settlements of liability by institutions. And sometimes even they go from a funder to the institution, which does a self-investigation. You know, but the leverage comes from the fact that the public money was diverted. And you would expect sort of the victim in financial terms to care. They don't always care as much as you might think, because it can also be embarrassing to government. But, you know, these are two things, maybe I was overly harsh, but I don't know that complaining to a journal, complaining to an institution on its own will be effective. Sometimes it is, sometimes journals surprise me, and you have to understand that my practice is probably people call me when things have not been effective, and these are the most important sort of, if you like, self-correction mechanisms when they do work. So, you know, maybe I have a sort of overly dim view. Here are some common responses that people accused of scientific fraud might put on. And the first one is the virtuoso defense. I first became aware of it in a stem cell case. I think the phrase was used in an article in the New York Times about a defense given by Piero Anversa, who was a scientist describing how he'd invented cardiac or discovered or manipulated cardiac stem cells that they could restore dead and diseased heart tissue. And the response was, well, I'm a virtuoso, okay? I can sing the opera that no one can sing, or I can do the experiment that no one else can do. And we see so many variants of this, you know. I'm a better experimentalist than you. I have better materials than you. We're at a better institution than you. We're better funded than you. We use a slightly different and, in fact, better setup than you did. And it goes on and on and on. And you just have to have the flag in your brain that says, oh, virtuoso defense, and you'll see it again and again. You know, retaliation is very common. I can talk about this a bit more tomorrow, but I think one thing that's important is for people to realize that sometimes by being, scientists are quite properly cautious when they bring these allegations forward, and they should be, and they'll often be asking questions and making factual comments rather than making accusations. That's generally a good thing. But sometimes for whistleblower protections to kick in, you need to have said something clear about what you think the problem is. Because if you're just asking questions, it can be less obvious that you are whistleblowing. Some people don't self-identify or want to self-identify as whistleblowers. That's fine, but if there's protection there, it's almost like, you know, if you have a disability but maybe don't self-identify with the disability, but it can be a useful name to identify where to get the services that can help you. Whistleblower protection is like that. So it's protection from retaliation. I think well-meaning advice, you know, you're right, but are you sure you want to do this? I worry a lot about people getting well-meaning advice that has a chilling effect. Hopefully not for me, but sometimes I'm cautious too. People get legal threats, they get cease and desist letters, they get, you know, threats that they're going to be sued for breaching some confidentiality rules that they're breaking in the US federal law, or some employment-based law or rule or agreement or something that they may have never agreed to or been shown to them ever before that time. And it can be scary for an institutional lawyer when you're unrepresented to be telling you, you cannot talk about this. A common response is due process, like, you've blindsided me. And it's amazing how commonly a target of a misconduct charge might refer to due process and saying, you're blindsiding me. And it's like, no, actually, I've sent you a very private email, you know, asking for a response. So you won't be blindsided. But people immediately feel blindsided. No one's ever said this to me before. And in terms of due process, I think should apply. I want to distinguish between confidentiality and secrecy. So we do want some confidential processes to exist. I think we all benefit from them sometimes. But confidentiality, to me, that's when people might have different perspectives or interests within the confidential group. They're going to agree to work them out together and come to some group agreement. We see some value to having protected spaces. Secrecy is when everyone in the group has the exact same sort of interests and they really want to lock down diversity of opinion. So this is not a technical distinction, but just that I think confidentiality is being overused in the academic community to facilitate cover-ups, and it's a problem. Inadvertent error is a common response, even when the whistleblower might not think it's reasonable. Explanation of inadvertence, that they might not buy it, but I think you're beginning to gain traction when someone says inadvertent error. When someone says their conclusions are unaffected, you're probably really gaining traction. And when they say, I just made a misjudgment, not fraud, the critique has landed. So, I think some of the guideposts is that, on the one hand, you do have a right to free expression if you're part of an open society. And I'm stunned again and again by the extent to which some folks in the academic community don't think this is the case. But, just because you're a scientist, you didn't lose your abilities, your rights as a citizen at the door when you got a PhD or whatever. On the other hand, the rights of individuals matter. Your own right to not suffer retaliation, collateral damage on people in the situation who didn't do bad conduct, and in fact the rights of the person who is being accused matter. So, those are the guideposts, I think, to balance. I'm not such a fan of institutional rights or institutional interests just because I think they're so, undoubtedly an institution has some interest, but I think they're very, very good at furthering them and seeing that they prevail. And I think we need to understand that an institution is not a whistleblower's friend. They're not really an ally to people who are trying to correct the record or correct science. They nearly always delay, downplay, or deny the problem. And I mean, they try denying first. If they cannot deny it, then they'll delay or downplay it when you come to a conclusion. I'm nearly at the end. So I despite saying all these depressing things, I want to have a positive message. And in fact, I had this thought when Jason Jin was speaking at the beginning about the legal process going awry of something that I think Preet Bharara said it in a book. He's a former prosecutor now, he's a podcaster, but he had a book called Doing Justice, and he said something about how in there, which I think he took from someone else, that, if you're a prosecutor and you're anxious when the jury is out deliberating, that's a good thing. So there's something in the sort of uncertainty about how things will turn out, and our anxiety about how things will turn out, that is important and that has integrity and merit. And I think it's the same thing for scientists. If you do your best to check your own work, but if you don't know, what the reproducibility community is going to find when you send it out, that's a good thing. Okay, we don't want the communities to be stitched up so that we know you're in nature, you're going to have an easy ride now. So, and I think it's the same thing for whistleblowing, is that instead of saying, I must get that retraction, to just say, yes, the journal needs to do what it's got to do, and it should do it, but without taking that responsibility away, let's also say that whistleblowers are somehow all testing the system, and the technical critiques are testing the system, and be fair and unpack what the critiques are, and give the opportunity to whoever is on the receiving end to, do the right thing. And if we're not sure whether they will or will not, then, maybe that's a good thing in the end.
We have time for one question. There might be time at the end for more questions.
What are the main laws that are preventing scientific self-correction? Or what laws should be passed?
So the question is, what are the main laws preventing? So I don't think the main problem is laws, but abusive laws is common. So in the US, we have a policy on research misconduct which has certain confidentiality rules that get abused to prevent self-correction. And I think there's analogous academic, I mean, it could be administrative rules, part of administrative law, or it could be academic, handbooks or policies, which is a type of law, or agreements that people sign when they sign their letter of hire or that are set out on some website. And they are sometimes overly expansive, and even when they aren't, they can be abused in these situations. So that's the type of law.
Thank you so much. I think there's a lot more to talk about there, like maybe anti-SLAPP laws that are good for scientific self-correction. So maybe the absence of anti-SLAPP laws would be kind of a problem. All right, our next speaker is Kate Christian.
Okay, so thank you very much. Thank you for the opportunity to be here. So first, just a little bit about me. So I've had a really quite long career in various medical research institutions, which I will not divulge because we'll soon see why. But I currently work for the Centre of Research Excellence in Pulmonary Fibrosis, based at the University of Sydney. I have no disclosures. I do all my research unfunded. I am not a statistician, and in fact, right now I actually even have no affiliation because the universities for whom I have done my research don't seem to care for what I have to say. We'll see why. So, I have come really across some pretty nasty circumstances in my work. But the biggest problem, and the one that got me underway on this, was when I was alerted to the fact that a very senior, very important researcher was bullying their staff. And there were allegations that they were also committing research fraud. This case isn't really over yet, so I can't give you the details. But I can tell you that once we started digging into this story, some really nasty things came out. So I started with one whistleblower, and then a little while later, a second one came to me, not knowing about the first one. So at that point, I knew that I had to get on and do something about it. So I did. Within a week, I had 5. Within one more week, I had 11. And then at that point, the organisation for which I worked at the time shut me down. So I wasn't officially allowed to keep on going. Of course, I did keep on going, but I no longer got accountable. So years on, this person now has been formally found to have committed research fraud. They've lost their job, but at what cost to the young researchers that were working with them and who they abused. So these ECRs were impacted when they were working in prison. They were impacted enormously when they stood up for themselves, and they all had to leave the institution, whichever one was relevant at the time, and go somewhere else. And this person pursued them relentlessly to try to blackmail the protections. The person being found guilty has had still more consequences because now a lot of papers are being retracted, and sometimes the ECRs were first authors during their PhDs, and they've lost their research through no fault of their own because it's been described as this. So I'm told by my whistleblowers that I'm still in touch with that even now the institution is still very busy looking after itself and its reputation and giving very little support. So this is evidence of one bad case, but it's the tip of their iceberg. So I was galvanized into action by this as a consequence of these whistleblowers, and so I did what turned out to be a very late career PhD, challenges faced by early career researchers in the sciences. And I did that because, in fact, it wasn't just this particular situation, but I'd just seen so much evidence of people having a really tough time in a very competitive scientific environment. And I wanted to try to do something about it, or get evidence for what I'd seen. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about the results of this project, and then the project I went on to do through QUT, in which I just sought to understand the pressures on early career scientists. We did, and for my definition of early career scientists, it's anyone up to 10 years postdoctoral. And the results I'm going to be showing you are mostly from surveys. I did 2 national surveys, one in 2019 and then the next one in 2022. So first, a quick little flick of background. So about 5,000 people completed a PhD in Australia every year. 78% of them will be aiming to have a career in academic research, but that will actually not be how it will go. About half of them will get to start as an RA or a postdoc in academia. In the end, about 30% of them will get to stay for a few years as a postdoc. 4% of them will end up with a permanent job, in a secure job in research, and 0.5% will get to be a professor in. So it doesn't stand for a very comfortable environment. And it ends up having a lot of dissatisfied people. So you can see there that 23% of our respondents said that they're dissatisfied, but worryingly only 57% of VCRs in STEM say that they are satisfied with their work, but 80% is the percentage for normal people in the Australian workforce. So that's an enormous difference. So we find a lot of dissatisfaction with workplace culture, and the next slides will tell you why. So the biggest issue is job insecurity, then stress, poor supervision, lack of work-life balance, difficulties for people with caring responsibilities, and the need to relocate, whether that's for sort of STEM cultural reasons or just simply to get another position. So I'll just flick through some of the things which this has actually been mentioned a couple of times already today. Lack of support from their superiors. So 71% of them say that they suffered from lack of support from their superiors. And I think that this is probably a reflection of the fact that mostly that ECRs just aren't worth worrying about because they're not going to be around for very long. They're not worth investing their time. Also, poor supervisors are often too busy themselves, and their supervision load is not properly factored into their job. So horrifying to hear from Carla, I think, who said about someone having 15 PhD students. Well, nice with the university, but it's hard to get, what's it like with a student? They would never see their person. So clearly, in that case, there's limited expectation that they will actually properly supervise. 48% of our respondents told us that they were stressed or very stressed on a daily basis, and 58% were considering leaving for mental health reasons, depression or anxiety. 61% reported that their workload was too high. Now, as we know, a lot of people in academia lost their jobs during COVID, and this very high figure probably reflects the fact that a lot of people were told, well, if you want to stay, you've got to do this too. So, there's just more to do with fewer people. 49% told us that they'd been impacted by inequitable hiring practices, and 13% said that was a significant problem. This is now affecting more than half women, 54% of women, but even the number of men, 41%, is a matter of great concern here. Continuing with the bad workplace behaviours, 46% report that they've been impacted by harassment based on power position, and 13% feel unsafe at work. So, asked about harassment in a different way, and in another question, 48% said they had personally experienced bullying. And the perpetrator was generally the supervisor or another senior colleague. I'm just going to read you a little bit of feedback that somebody gave us. Bullying has been a horrendous and unexpected part of academia for me. It's impacted me in the last 5 years and destroyed people around me. The institution in the end supported the bully, who was superior in hierarchy and was receiving all sorts of high distinctions. So it was probably seen as a better investment than junior staff. Moving on to questionable research practices, 47% identify a very worrying rate of impact to themselves or their career advancement from questionable research practices. So we were really shocked in 2019 when that number was 38%, but by 2022 after COVID it got up to 47%. So in this second survey, we looked into the questionable research practice in greater depth to see what was meant by these claims, and there was a wide range of them. Authorship was the biggest problem, unethical pressure regarding authorship, whether it was including people or not including people on papers. But there was also inappropriate presentation of results, analysis of data, and project design. 13% of them believe that the questionable research practices they had observed should lead to a retraction or to taking away funding if people knew about it. But it was very worrying and a poor reflection on the institutions that 22% of them felt that if they brought the matter up, the university wouldn't do anything about it. Suspecting that bullying and harassment and questionable research practices were likely to be found together, we had a look at that, and we found that indeed those people who had been impacted by questionable research practices would be much more likely to have been bullied. There's 57% compared with the people who haven't been bullied, is 34%. And we think it's likely that the bullying and the questionable research practices continue to be problematic, is that the people just do not have confidence in their institutions, that they're going to act. So 74% thought that they might not act, and 62% felt that they were just too uncomfortable to speak up because they would be bullied themselves or for fear just general negative consequences. So there's some nasty comments made by somebody in the survey about the terrible times they have been subjected to 2 years of bullying by my supervisor, not received any support from the university. 14 other staff and students have come forward to complain to HR in the last 12 months and nothing has been done. All but one has left the union. So a counsellor because of bullying or harassment from my previous supervisor. There were 7 of us that filed a complaint, but I don't think the university is taking sufficient action, as this particular person is high up and brings the money for the university, so they won't stand up to her. She's also behaved like this in previous roles and keeps getting away with this behaviour. There are 7 of us who have ended up seeing counsellors, psychologists. I have anxiety and panic attacks, and I'm now triggered every time I see an email come through. And one more. All incidents of bullying and harassment were well documented, yet supervisors and management remained protected. There was no independent team to work through the formal complaint. So where to from here? So I think the big issue is that Australia doesn't have a centralised academic integrity office, and we really need one. Instead, the universities are required to investigate and manage the issues themselves, and obviously they've always got a conflict of interest, and they want to avoid any negative publicity. So Leanne, who is going to talk next, had this article on the 11th of November in the press, and this was discussed I'd asked the Australian Academy of Science might be listening, but you know, we haven't got there. We haven't got there yet. David Lowe, who used to be at High, has been advocating for that for a long time. He's also got another suggestion about something you could do. This is something he said to me one day. You know, we could just have a button on the front page of the internet of every university where people could press it, and that would lead them to somebody that they could talk to, maybe to Eugenie, just to find somewhere to go. So I'll be very interested to see what my colleagues talk about in the talks yet to come, because there's some very bad things. Now, how much time we got? I could read a couple of stories, but I might be out of my time. Am I out of my time?
You're out of time. We have time for questions.
Okay, all right. No, we'll have time for the question. If anyone wants to talk to me about it, I do have permission to share other stories just from real people from my research. But this is something that we have to just remember, that you know, this is not just research. These are real people who are suffering very badly in the hands of bad people. So thank you very much to my colleagues.
We have time for one or two questions.
Can you comment on whether there's sort of field-specific differences? Can you comment on whether there's field-specific differences in your participants in your research? Whether some fields are worse or better than others?
I can't actually, because we so I certainly can't comment on the institution specific. We deliberately left what is the name of your institution out of the second survey. We put it in the first one so they could tell us if they wanted to, and about half people did. Second one, because we were going to ask a lot of questions about potentially tricky things, we couldn't know what the institution was because we'd have a responsible under the code responsible research to do something about it. And we thought people would be reluctant to tell us if they knew that we had to take it on. In terms of we didn't find a link between particular disciplines and we did find an age-related change. So the people going further on in their career were having a worse time, which was a bit surprising. And something that surprises everybody is that it's not actually, it's pretty much the same for men and women, just in all the bad things. Okay, thank you.
Thanks so much, Kate. And we will hear from you again in just a bit, but not quite next. So first we have our next speaker, Raffaella Demichelis, who is joining us online. Raffaella, go ahead.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. I'm trying to share my screen now. So just give me a second. Okay, I believe you can now all see it. So good afternoon, everyone. My name is Raffaella Demichelis. I'm an associate professor at Curtin University, but I'm giving this presentation on behalf of the EMCR Forum, and thanks, Adrian, for inviting us to be part of this session. I'm joining from Wajak Nyunga Boje, and I acknowledge and pay respect to the traditional custodians of the lands on which I'm speaking today, the Wajak Nyunga people, and to their elders past and present. I extend my acknowledgement to the traditional custodians of the lands where the others attendees and speakers are. Okay, so I'm giving this presentation on behalf of this group of people, the EMCR Forum of the Australian Academy of Science. And so I give you a brief overview of who we are. So the EMCR Forum was funded about 12 years ago, actually. It's made of 13 executive committee members. We have one staff member from the Academy of Science to be our program manager. We have about 30 all the executive members are volunteers. And also we have another 30 volunteers that represent us in Australian institutions. Plus we're trying to build a sort of network also with the EMCRs in national committees. And the whole network counts about 6,000 members. And whereas I don't have the full demographics, I have some data from 2020, which you can see all there. And what is striking clear is that a lot of people at this career stage, so walking at the early career stage and moving towards a more senior position, about a half of us have caring responsibilities. So we have one of the most intense periods of our career that coincides with one of the most intense periods of our private life, which explains a lot of stress and burnout and a lot of issues that are going on. Now, who are EMCRs? So last year, we realized that the definition that we usually apply is not inclusive of all the people who are actually early and mid-career researchers and would identify with that. So we define an EMCR as an individual between 0 and 15 years from graduating from a PhD or equivalent, discounting career interruptions, who actively engage in research either as researcher or in a role that requires substantial research training and experience, which is inclusive of researchers in academia, but also in all other contexts. And we realize there are many researchers who are actually researchers, so they can identify as EMCRs, but do not have a higher degree, but equivalent professional experience. And these are typically people that are going through non-traditional career pathways or that belong to underrepresented communities, because sometimes people from underrepresented communities get kicked out of academia sooner than achieving a PhD. So the environment can be that exclusive to those people. But there are many of those people who hold actual research positions. So they have equivalent professional experience, and we want to be inclusive and representative of those researchers as well. Now, what is that the forum is doing? So the big picture behind our work is that we advocate for improvements in the research environment. And this is by advising the Australian Academy of Science, providing recommendations to government and decision makers. And also we have managed to engage with national funding bodies and contribute to consultations and providing feedbacks. We organize career development opportunities and outreach to the EMCR community. And we're also supporting or designing events and initiatives on equity, diversity, and inclusion. So examples of what we do can be found on our website. So 2 good readings to understand that showcase a bit what we're doing are last year's annual report, and there's also a sort of short report of what we've been done this year. And then there's also a page which lists all our policy and government submissions and position statement. And if you want to know a little bit more about the history of the forum, there's also an issue of the newsletter that can be accessed online. So about what we're doing, we try to bring to the decision-making table the voice of EMCRs and the diversity of their voices and the diversity of this community. And I've put here a lot of keywords of all of the things that we bring to the table when we go to consultations, on when we provide feedback to government, the Academy of Science, funding bodies, and institutions more generally. And why are we doing this? So this is, I reckon this presentation has a lot of links with the previous presentation. So the current challenges of early and mid-career researchers as we walk our way to the future of STEM are related to job security. So it's lack of employment opportunities, research funding, limited career agility, so also limited opportunities to transition into other roles outside academia or from outside academia getting in academia. So moving in the job market as a researcher is not obvious. Poor work-life balance, and that is linked also to the pressure to publish, which puts us in a position to sometimes put metrics before research integrity, increasing and unsustainable workload, which is linked to rigid and unsustainable workload models. We need to exceed excellent benchmark across multiple skills that include non-STEM skills. So we need to be the best at everything, and that is not possible. No one can be good at that. But this is what they are asking us to match. And all of this makes this community very vulnerable to burnout and other mental health issues. The lack of funding, there's also a lot of people complain about the lack of support for fundamental and interdisciplinary research. So all of these challenges are amplified for researchers who belong to these two communities. And also there's a lot of discrimination going on. I won't spend too much words on this because I think the previous presentation has covered it pretty well. Now, all of these challenges, so we do represent EMCRs in STEM. However, we do realize that these are more general issues that are also shared by the other communities of EMCR, so researchers that are not doing research in STEM are doing research in humanities, arts, and social sciences. And this is why we are trying to partner with the other EMCR network that has been formed, I think, a couple of years ago. That's called SHAPE. And we have a session coming in a week, and it will be free to join. So this is part of a professional development program that we are delivering, but we're making this particular session free to join for everyone. So if you're interested, please go on our website and have a look at the link and join the session. Now, about the why we are all doing this. We want to imagine a future for EMCRs, and we want to build a safe space to discuss and design feedback delivery, form of support, and possible solutions. Now, how are we doing this? Now, this is how we are organized. We organize our work into portfolios, and each of the executive member is involved in one or more portfolios. And within all of this, we try to cover all of the issues, and we try to, let's say, bring the voice of EMCRs at the tables of these discussions. We have core tasks that are done every year, and we have one-year projects that it's either working on a team. For example, last year, we worked a lot on redefining success. And every second year, we deliver a professional development event. And this year is actually focused on reframing success. So this is on. It's fully online. And to make this accessible and flexible, we have split it into small sessions that are delivered across 3 weeks. And all of the sessions will be accessible, all of the recordings will be accessible for 3 months on the platform. And so if anyone is interested, you can still join and have a look, or tell people that can be interested to have a look at this program. Now, let's get to the point of this session. How do we blow the whistle? So we try to open and contribute to conversation. We listen and promote a listening approach. And we try to promote support and create links and opportunities for our community to deliver feedback and to provide a direction to look at. We are trying to do it strategically, sometimes holding on your whistle and keeping it warm. It will enable you to blow louder when the time comes. And so this is two mantras that we're repeating ourselves. This comes from people higher up us, but it was good feedback we received, is that firing cannonballs at government, minister, ARC, or whatever won't help us delivering our feedback, because most of these people know their problems. They're not acting on that, but they're interested in sometimes solutions, way we can help, or directions to look at. So we try to be positive in our interaction as much as we can. And also, this is a feedback we received from one of these bodies we engaged to, is that they're very, in principle, this is what they say, keen to listen to EMCRs, but whenever they approach our community, they struggle discriminating noise from feedback. So they get a lot of anecdotal stories, they get personal feelings, but sometimes they claim it's hard to them to extrapolate feedback. So we're trying to be mindful of these two things whenever we interact with these bodies, and we try to do it strategically and positive, and hoping that gives us a better chance to be listened at. And so how do we blow the whistle safely? Because that's sometimes an issue with many people who want to blow the whistle. Now, one of the things that is good about the EMCR Forum is that it has no direct links with our employer. So every time you say something within your organization, you are implicitly speaking against someone. So you're not speaking against someone, maybe you're speaking against a policy or a practice, but that will always be a direct link with the person who has been in charge of writing that policy or to take that decision. So acting from an external organization gives you that screen that you speak against the thing and not against anyone. So it can't be seen as going against anyone. We try to work as a team at a national level with the support of about 6,000 members in the Academy of Science. And that is, again, a big critical mass that it's another screen. So I'm not speaking directly on behalf of myself, but I'm bringing the feedback of an entire community. And we try to work as much as possible on the big picture, so not on single cases. And we try to do this work of discriminating feedback from noise, or better, transforming what it can be perceived as noise into actual feedback. We've built a reputation as an accountable and trustable stakeholder with many organizations. And in the past few years, we had a lot of occasions to deliver feedback and to bring the voice of EMCRs to the decision-making table. Not that every time that made a difference, but at least the voice has been there. Now, two recent pieces that, again, are linked to the previous talk is these two pieces we contributed to Nature Career and to Future Campus about misconduct and bullying. And we were able to do that. So we were able to make that, to blow the whistle and to do it with actual feedback rather than being seen as noise, because we had data to rely on, and most of those data came from the paper that was presented, that Kate presented before. And this is another thing. So sometimes when blowing the whistle, things are not quite right, but you need to make sure you have data to support your claim. because without data, whoever listens can come up with their own slide and say, well, actually data go the opposite way. And so if you don't, you need to be ready to respond to that. So whenever doing that, just make sure that you have data that support your claim. And so further information about the forum can be found at these links. And I just would like to thank again the entire Forum Executive Committee, and all of them contributed to this presentation. And thank you all for attending this talk.
Thank you, Raffaella. That was great. We have time for 1 or 2 questions, if there are any, before we move on to this talk. Okay. Well, thank you very much, Raffaella. And we'll move on to our next speaker, Mannix, and we will have time for a few questions at the end too for any of the speakers. You can put one in the meantime.
Yep. Thank you very much. I do not have slides, so I was just going to leave that big image of Raffaella up. Fantastic. So, my name is Mannix. I'm the National Science Reporter for The Age and the Sydney Morning Herald, and I guess I'm kind of the counterpart to Eugenie for people who would like to raise issues of fraud and misconduct and malfeasance and bullying, but want to seek out the media rather than a lawyer. And there are certainly pros and cons to that approach. So today I'm going to talk a little bit about why you might want to consider approaching the media with a story, a concern that you hold. We'll look at a couple of examples where that I think has worked out quite well and been quite powerful. And then at the end, we're going to talk how you might actually practically wish to do this. Trying to ask me what I wanted to call my presentation today, I decided I would be a little bit self-interested and called it How to Be a Scientific Whistleblower. Please consider it. Because here's the thing that I think a lot of people don't appreciate about journalists. We actually know far, far less about your industries than you think. I often think there's a reluctance from people to approach journalists because they think, oh, the journalists must know about such and such doing the wrong thing. There's big, there's all these rumors spreading around. The reality is most of the time we don't. We are entirely reliant on you as human sources to confidentially approach us and clue us in so that we can start the reporting process, start seeking out other sources of information, other human sources, and build a picture that might eventually result in something being in the paper. So I would argue to you, and I think we've heard lots about this today, that that's a really important function and a really important role and responsibility that scientists hold. Science and medicine are incredibly powerful industries. We're talking hundreds of millions of dollars in taxpayer funding, we're talking huge pharmaceutical companies, and we're talking a lot of power. People trust you guys. They trust what you say, they follow the health advice that you give them, they line up as guinea pigs for your experimental drugs. So I think that the idea that science is very powerful is, I think, really key. And unfortunately, science doesn't often match that power with the appropriate levels of accountability and transparency, as I'm sure you know. Much of science is based on trust, which comes with its own problems. Then the industry of science, the research institutes, the universities are self-regulated. We wouldn't allow self-regulation in other sectors of public life when they're dealing with such huge amounts of taxpayer money and have such significant impacts on people's lives. You know, we don't allow it in banking anymore, but with science, we still allow it, and it comes with a very significant series of problems, many of which we've heard about, and many of which we will touch on as we go here. So I'm going to talk to you guys about a couple of examples of scientific whistleblowing that I've been involved in. The first is what I suppose you call public whistleblowing. So this is a more common and easy case where you as a scientist say, there is something that is not right, that the public needs to be informed about, and I wish to work with the journalists to expose that. So a few years ago, I was speaking to Professor Chris Marr. He's one of Australia's leading back pain researchers, and I asked him if he had anything that I should be reporting on. And in the way of this sort of I was discussing before, he's like, oh, I don't know, what about this? And he rolled out the most extraordinary and I think important story. So Chris had done a story on a nerve pain drug called Lyrica, also known as pregabalin. This was a drug that was marketed by Pfizer. They spent tens of millions of dollars selling this as a very powerful nerve pain drug. Chris's, and importantly, when we're trying to wean people off opioids, they came out and said, oh, not addictive, no significant side effects. Or have we heard that before? We hear it with every time that we try and take people off opioids with a new drug. Anyway, Chris did a study, an independent study, comparing Lyrica to a placebo for nerve pain, and discovered not only that it was no better than a placebo, but that in his cohort, he was recording very, very significant levels of serious adverse effects. So this was addiction, he was showing early signs of, significant weight gain, which is a big problem when you're dealing with a chronic pain cohort, because weight gain can often exacerbate pain, and perhaps most troublingly, he found really significant levels of sudden onset suicidal ideation. So Chris published this paper without really much fanfare. Sometimes we pick up papers as they go in the media, sometimes they get missed. And so Chris had this, but Chris hadn't just done this, he'd gone further. And he had started to build up a picture of how this drug had become so widely used. And he said to me, look, Liam, you can see the way that Pfizer paid this very expensive marketing campaign featuring Australian sports stars to get people interested. You can see how they rolled out a consumer tool to diagnose yourself with nerve pain, which would seemingly diagnose everybody with nerve pain. He was able to point me to how Pfizer was able to pay doctors training fees to get this drug in their hands and teach them how to prescribe it. How they were able to pay senior scientists go out and essentially endorse it to their colleagues. Chris had all the bits, and he just was like, oh, maybe I should tell a journalist about this. Extraordinary. So we took that and did a big investigation. We then, and I think this is an important value of journalism, we were then able to go the next step and say, right, how did this drug get approved? And through our work, we were able to show how Pfizer originally put this drug up for public subsidy in Australia and were knocked back. Because again, their data was crappy. And then Pfizer followed the pharma playbook and said, right, well, our drug doesn't work very well. Let's get patients to demand it. And so they then heavily resourced a series of charities and consumer bodies. And those bodies then said to their members, hey, wouldn't it be good if we could have this new drug to treat your chronic pain? And the members went to the government and said, we really need this. And so the government said, oh, that probably doesn't work very well, but consumers want it, so we'll give it a subsidy. Pfizer then had its subsidised drug. They could then roll out all their other tools of influence and advertising and turn this very quickly into a blockbuster with the corresponding levels of damage that you expect to see in the community. Very large levels of addiction, very large levels of overdose, and as we reported on, significant levels of death and suicide. Now, we were able to put this out in the media. The outcome, I think, has been reasonably good. We've got a black box label on this drug now about addiction and about suicidal ideation risks. This, I think, is a case study of how you as scientists can come to us and say, hey, look, there's an issue. We have the data. Let's tell the story. And sometimes, not always, sometimes we can make social change. So that is sort of public access whistleblowing, where you might come to us and say, there's a problem. That is how we should cover it so that we can deal with it. The second kind of whistleblowing is more fraught. This is confidential whistleblowing. This typically involves allegations of fraud or research misconduct or bullying that you may be personally experiencing or witnessing at your own institute. These sort of investigations are almost always confidential, and I'll be honest with you, they are difficult. They require a tremendous level of bravery, and I have to take my hats off to the people who approach us with this sort of stuff, because it is hard, but as we spoke about before, if we're not willing to do something about it, then it just sort of stays there and stains this thing that we all care about, which is science. And there is a lot that we as journalists can do to support it if you wish to take this path. So I'll talk about one case which I'm not sure if Kate mentioned, but it's funny talking about this. Just down the road at QIMR, we have the case of Professor Mark Smythe, I'm sure many people will be aware of. Now, our investigations reporting is still ongoing with this, so I don't want to speak about anything other than what's on the public record, but certainly what QIMR have already reported themselves with the help of a High Court Justice and an internal review is that a group of whistleblowers attempted over many years to raise concerns about what was going on in this lab. I think we've already heard from Kate that there were allegations of bullying. QIMR have also sort of reported on that. And now we've gotten to the point where QIMR have actually gone and referred these allegations to corruption authorities. We're sort of playing catch up in some ways with this because the process is happening, but certainly we have been able to take this case and use it to repeatedly call the government to action on the issues of scientific misconduct and research fraud. I think for a very long time, this either was an issue that bubbled along below the surface or one that important, powerful people in government could kind of ignore. Nobody wants to, tear strips off science too much. It's important that we maintain trust in it. We're slowly now, I think in part based on your work, based on a lot of the reporting that we're doing on these cases, we're starting to see the government's head turn. So as Kate pointed out before, we now have for the first time Universities Australia endorsing a research misconduct watchdog in Australia. The Australian Academy of Science is there as well. Pretty extraordinary. Jason Clare, the research minister, has on his desk a review of the ARC that states that it should be given some sort of mandated research watchdog function or research integrity function. He has said that he will agree with that recommendation and will do something about it. Still waiting for those details. I believe there's also a review going on at the moment of ARIC, the Australian Research Integrity Council at the NHMRC. It'll be interesting to see what that concludes. But I think what you are seeing, with your continued advocacy, hopefully we can get there, is some real momentum to say, hey, it's not doing a disservice to science to call out these issues. It's not crumbling the faith. It's making sure that this really important thing that we do and care about is regulated as well as it possibly can be and has that level of certainty so that people can know that what they're getting is believable and trustworthy and made with integrity. And so I think we're hopefully getting some of the way there. So that's basically everything I had. The only other thing, as I promised you, is a little bit of advice on if you would like to do this. So my first piece of advice is if you are considering speaking to a journalist, do a little bit of research about journalists. There are a lot of us out there, and there are, I think, a number of very good health and science specialist journalists who will likely be reporting in your areas. They work for The Guardian, they work for the ABC. We have a good team at The Age and the Sydney Morning Herald. There are also some excellent freelancers. Nature's got a very good team here. And if you can find a journalist who is interested, who is clearly already reporting on your area, then generally they will have a publicly available email. We almost all have it because, as I said, we're entirely reliant on you guys coming forward and raising issues with us. Find that email, hit them up with an email. Say, hey, look, I've got a story, I've got some concerns. Would you like me to lay them out for you? Can we meet for coffee? Most journalists worth their salt will be like, oh my God, this is gold, let's get into it. The trick is, of course, making sure you're picking the right journalists. If you're just approaching general journalists, they will often struggle with this. It's a technical field dealing with scientific misconduct and research fraud. So pick a specialist, pick someone that you can see is already reporting on the area, approach them with an email, and then if you're concerned, if you wish to report confidentially, generally journalists will make available an encrypted email account. You can often find them on their Twitter, or you can search for them. They often have websites where we will make them available. And for example, I use Proton Mail, so you can approach me on there. I deal with a number of people who generate their own anonymous Proton Mail accounts. It's encrypted, you don't know who it is, you can then safely send it and keep it a long way away from your work email. So yeah, that would be my advice. To restate, we really care about this industry, we really want to hear from you. If you have concerns, please feel free to come forward. I hope that was helpful. Hopefully we can get something done. Okay.
We have time for one or two questions for Liam, and then I'll ask all the speakers to come up or turn your camera on, please, Raffaella. So we'll have time for questions as well. Any questions for Liam right away?
Hey Liam, thanks, that was great.
Sorry, there's a mic back there.
Hey Liam, thanks, that was great. How do we strike the balance between showing what's wrong in our fields, but also making sure we don't get this public perception of what's happening in research overall is terrible, it's wrong, shouldn't be funded anymore? Because, yeah.
That's a really terrific question. And I tend to think that certainly institutions do err too far on the side of we must protect science at all costs. It can never be shown to be wrong. The chief scientist put out a big paper about that recently. I was like, I wonder if you're missing the point here. The reality is, unless we take systemic steps to address this, we're going to keep reporting on the problems in science because, as you know, they are reasonably widespread. So I think it is important to keep coming forward and keep trying to take that cultural step to say, hey, science can be better than this. We can root this out. We can do a good job. We can build these institutions that we need. But I would know that there's a level of self-interest there from me because I would like to keep reporting on this. But yeah, I suppose that's my answer. That we can't accept status quo. We have to change.
I'll just add, even though no one asked me, a empirical question whether reporting on problems in science increases or decreases public trust in science. I think there are probably some people for whom they're like, thank you. I thought, there must be things like this going on, and I trust it more if you're not denying it or telling me science is always right. All right, can we bring all of our speakers up here? And Raffaella, if you don't mind turning your video on. So then we'll take.
So my video is on.
Perfect.
Can you see me? Okay.
Yeah, now we can. Great, thank you.
Can I please answer the question too? Please?
Yes. So we're going to, do we use that? Can you go up here and
stand there, you're.
Oh, yeah. About whoever speaking,
Okay. So about the keeping science looking credible, I think we need to also do a lot of promotion about the fact that we do have ethics committees, we do have there is oversight going on. Or I mean, that is the routine. It needs to be talked about as well. Not just the big bad people who are doing bad things, but talking about the good things and showing that there are proper processes and protocols and ways to do it and what's open science.
Yeah, can I just add to that, Kate? I don't think you guys do have a trust issue. I'm
not sure that it's a big problem. Like if you look at the surveys on trust in science, it remains very, very high. I think there was this concern during COVID that perhaps we dinged it, that people might be less trusting, but it just doesn't show up in the empirical data. So I think this is less a concern about damaging trust in science and more a concern about ensuring that science is of the highest quality.
The latest Pew results in the US came out last week, and they did go down for the first time. Trust in science went down. Actually, they had gone up during COVID, levels of trust in science in the US, and then they went down a bit. They're still very high compared to almost any other group. They're more polarized now, according to the political party in the US than they were in the past. So that's in the US. Other questions? Yeah, Adrian.
Oh, damn it. A little bit of practice there, sorry. Got a question for you, Eugenie. I'd heard about that law where the whistleblower gets money, and I think it wasn't a research one, but they dobbed in their drug company for doing something wrong and ended up earning hundreds of millions of dollars, or maybe tens of millions of dollars.
Good.
Now you're talking.
That sounds like a fantastic law. Is it working well, and is it something you think that could be exported to other countries, looking at where we are right now?
Sure. I think you're talking about the False Claims Act, which is a federal law that allows whistleblowers to file a complaint in court and provide a copy to the government alleging misuse of public money in a variety. It can be in a wide, anywhere there's government expenditure, you can file this, and the whistleblower can qualify for between 10% and 30% of what the government recovers, and the government can recover up to 3 times what was defrauded. So it is true that it's been a pretty successful law. There's been most whistleblowers who file, you have to find a law firm to do it for you. You cannot do it by yourself. And I think the law firms do a reasonably good job of screening the cases. So there isn't I'd argue there isn't a bunch of frivolous cases being filed because a law firm is putting some resources in at the front end, which they wouldn't do if they haven't independently assessed it and think it's a good prospect. So there's a certain amount of gatekeeping among whistleblower lawyers. And so I think it does work well. It uses a mechanism, it's called QUITAM, Latin, Q-U-I-T-A-M, 2 words. And it comes from English common law, and it was abolished in the UK because there was a feeling it was being used frivolously, and this was hundreds of years ago. But in the US, it was brought in the Civil War to deal with fraud on the government. And yes, there have been healthcare fraud cases, including the one I referenced, where whistleblowers have actually made hundreds of millions, into the hundreds of millions, because if you can allege, I just asked Liam here whether Lyrica had faced any enforcement in the US, and he told me it's been done, but which I have to go and look up. But if you can have a nationwide scheme that's defrauding Medicare or Medicaid, which are the US healthcare schemes, then people can make money, but you have to set that against sort of the benefit, which is and the risk that someone takes when they get involved in a process like that. It can be 10 years for one of these cases to result in a payout, and in the meantime, it may not be easy to work in that industry again. So some people have a huge windfall, other people may not. And there's been, I'd also say that one feature of the law I like is if the government doesn't take the case on, the whistleblower can still go forward and try to prove it independently. The US has other schemes like this. It's not just the False Claims Act. There's also securities cases. A whistleblower can qualify for awards by making a securities allegation, and so on and so forth. And I do think it would work in other jurisdictions, and certainly some form of very generous compensation for people who go and do whistleblowing should be available. So you can do it, you can have it implemented in a different way, but I think it's a good idea. Because otherwise, as I said earlier, you only have really a downside.